because film and animation are a collaborative effort, bloobly bloobly. And I want to give my respect to how much talent goes into the show's production. While these two do many of the voices, the actors they pull in go a long way. Every guest does a great job and adds their own flavor, and there is no Doc, Brock, or Dean without James Urbaniak, Patrick Warburton, or Michael Sinterniklaas. There just isn't. Doc Hammer is a musician and has written tracks for the series, but the vast majority of the show's music, including the signature opening and end credits, is done by J.G. Thirlwell. It's great stuff, suits the whole production flawlessly. And visually, the show is a treat to behold. It's not always perfect, it's outsourced animation for network television after all, but it's impressively put together. They bring on killer animators, strong background and storyboard artists, fresh talent and comic book veterans who can really sell the world behind these words. The painted backgrounds are gorgeous and varied. Every location has its own mood, and they match some ambitious storyboards. There's action and camera angles, there's day and night, and the animation is no less impressive. These are detailed and natural character designs, communicating who these people are, what their role is, and just about a million tiny references. The hands look like hands, there are body types and facial structures. Beauty, ugliness, youth, age, and deformity. These are things you can't always count on in animation, especially on a budget. That being said, when it comes to the story and characters, who they are, who they'll become, and where they're going, it's nothing but Doc and Jackson. These are two brilliant guys who form like Voltron into one super genius. They each have their own strengths as writers. Jackson tends to lean a little harder on the format and grand plot lines, moving things forward with action and intrigue, where Doc will have the characters sit in a room and really talk for a while, getting into their history a bit. Not to say they both can't do both of those things very well, it's just sort of where their writing trends. But what has really allowed the series to blossom and grow is from the conversation between them. They hone in on the specific kind of jokes and references you hone in on when you're talking with someone who's on exactly the same frequency as you. The kind of particular voices or outfits you saw in movies no one cares about, but that's somehow individually stuck in both of your craws, so you know they must be important somehow. That's the kind of nerdiness the Venture Brothers can really get to the heart of. Together they push each other to run with ideas you'd think were too stupid to run with if they only existed in your own head until they become brilliant. The series has an incredibly elaborate and impressive continuity, and I'm sure that this or that was planned out from the beginning, but I can totally buy that so much of this was made up on the fly and it all just happened to fit together perfectly. That's just what happens when people are in sync. Jackson has directed nearly every episode of the series, effectively all of them up until the last season when Juno Lee stepped in with Jackson supervising. Barring a technicality, since Careers in Science is a Doc Hammer joint, every episode in the series save one was being written by one or both of them. That one episode was written by Ben Edlund, creator of The Tick, and Jackson Public actually worked as a storyboard artist and writer on both the original live-action and animated The Tick series before the Venture Brothers.
Mr. President, I believe in you.
If you're a fan of The Tick, that might give you an idea of where the series' spirit comes from as a superhero parody, but even that doesn't really capture where the show's heart is at. Public goes into this in Go Team Venture, the art and making of the Venture Brothers. As an aside, I got this book for like $25 and it's fucking incredible. There's so much art in here and they go through almost every episode of the show in detail, with Ken Plume logging Doc and Jackson going into everything I've ever wondered about. Every joke, premise, and reference, where ideas got out of hand and when they decided to run with them anyway because it'd just be funny. Well worth nabbing if you're a fan of the show. Anyway, Jackson goes into how the impetus for the show really came from an old Tom Swift Jr. novel, and the realization of how much Johnny Quest had aped it. Tom Swift was published by the Stratemeyer Syndicate alongside Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, so you can see how a lot of these things started getting mashed up, and where the jokes started coming from. That sort of Leave It to Beaver style 50s wholesomeness run up against a more cynical, modern view of the past. And of course, what would be the reality of the adventures they go on. The show has never really been about the titular Venture Brothers, but it's not hard to see how they're the well everything sprung from. They, and so many other comedy duos on the show, are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, functionally indistinguishable as personalities and on a wavelength they only share with each other. The confused and unwitting observers of a story happening around them, blindly walking into their own demise. When you write a comedy, you have to start with a joke, and Hank and Dean, at least initially, are the joke. They're the comical idea of a glassy-eyed Goofus and Gallant saying "golly gee" as they watch a man bleed out in front of them. To quote the book, "Everything is a little sad. I was younger, so I had an actively darker, subversive sense of humor." That's how you make comedy when you're younger. You make everything suck and you make everything get chaotic and nasty and subversive. Not that I still don't love that kind of stuff. Now I just think about the characters. The route to writing about failure is more hopeful somehow, and more based in real life. It's not just what's the worst thing I can do to these people. It's what's the embarrassing moment from my life that I can draw from. What's the real thing that happened to me, even if it turns into a version of it that involves lasers and nanobots. It's still, oh yeah, I shit my pants in public. Whatever it is, it comes from a more real place. That gets to the root of what does it for me about this show. There's truly nothing new under the sun. We've been subverting and deconstructing for hundreds of years, and the thing about artists is that they always want to make something that's never been made. We've seen Godzilla step on Bambi. What's next? I can't say the bare root of what if comic books but real is brand spanking new. We all have this perfectly generic idea of Superman in our heads, but comics are no stranger to new concepts, pushing the envelope and really exploring every direction a superhero can go in. And it's not just comics, superheroes have been fucking everywhere for a while now, and even I can tell we're getting more high-profile stuff with an edgier, more biting, and more comedic attitude.
Listen up, goons!
Excuse me, I identify as a hench?
It really all comes down to thesis and tone, and when it does, The Venture Brothers isn't a show about how if Superman was real, wouldn't that be fucked up? It's about how if Superman was real, you'd think he was a fucking dork. For every 1,000 people calling him an existential threat to humankind, you'd have 1,000 more Lex Luthors on Twitter saying, "Get this ass Boy Scout off my timeline," because that's real life too. It's not all war and tragedy, blood and piss and bad sex. That's all in there, of course, but real life is also pettiness and insecurity. It's the boring moments that happen in between joy and catastrophe. It's being surrounded by people you love and can't stand at the same time. It's weird enemies you don't understand how you made, expectations you didn't live up to, and trying to figure out if you're grateful or resentful of what you have. Real life is about failure. But you know what they say about failure? It's stupid. I mean, it's the best teacher and all that, but also it's just funny. When you fall flat on your face, all you can really do is laugh about it.
Oh god, I'm gonna puke all over his crappy childhood memories. So good.
You can find something to smile about in something that hurts, and when you learn to do that, you can live honestly. Look at everything horrible about the world head on, tell yourself it's beautiful, and then start to convince yourself that it actually is. Or maybe the beautiful thing is just that you bothered to look in the first place. So that's what I think failure is in this show, or at least what it means to me. The way fucking up everything can just make it better. A little more funny, a little more endearing, and a little more human. So that's our theme here, folded as unceremoniously as possible into every trope and facet of pop culture the show can get a beat on. I hope you can see how a show could really start to grow from that. The idea that The Venture Brothers is a parody of Johnny Quest isn't inaccurate, but it can't really be contained by that label. It's more of a template than a box to be put in. The great thing about Johnny Quest was that it felt like it could take you anywhere and show you anything, and The Venture Brothers feels the same way, just with a different outlook. Take for example Go Team Venture.
I don't know, they just do that.
The show has had a number of catchphrases catch on, like Spanakopita and Ignore Me, the latter one being one Doc Hammer has been open about hating, or at least hating getting it parroted back to him, and knowing that definitely paid off for me. But the main catchphrase is Go Team Venture. It's one that's clunky and awkward, meant to rip on everything you think it's ripping on. But at a certain point, it just means what it means. It makes you remember everything, it gives you the warm fuzzies. It's still a joke, it's still self-aware, but you feel it. That's what the show is. Less deconstructive and more reconstructive. Bringing back the magic, but a bit more honest, because you're a grown-up now. The Venture Brothers isn't here to ask what is Johnny Quest, it's here to ask what is Rusty Venture.
It's when you then you open up your hand inside his No, he's laying down. Then whatever you come out with, you rub on his dick.
Wrong! The Rusty Venture is a straight move.
Alright, I had to get that one out of the way. Dr. Venture, everyone. The man, the myth, the absolute dirtbag. You couldn't ask for a better leading man. By which I mean you couldn't ask for a worse leading man. Unsuccessful, self-obsessed, sick of his life, but still somehow oozing with an incredibly watchable anti-charisma. Rusty is our cautionary tale about the dangers of boy adventuring. He lived the Johnny Quest life without having any say in the matter. Traveling the world, seeing the sights, pulling the trigger. Like the Venture Brothers themselves, Rusty grew up being dragged by his father and batshit nuts friends and allies through a terrifying, violent world with hardly any agency. Something he never really found even after inheriting the Venture fortune. But unlike Hank and Dean, Rusty's father was more successful than you could ever imagine. Jonas Venture Sr. was a manipulative narcissist admired by the world for his scientific accomplishments and hyper-masculine James Bond meets Doc Savage public persona. He's a genuine villain who was able to take everything he ever wanted from the world by seamlessly fitting into the role of everyone's hero. Even without having been suddenly plucked from Rusty's life, he's not a man who would likely ever really be willing to hand the reins over to his son. This feeling manifests as Jonas Jr., an all but totally literal tumor growing in Doc his whole life who, upon his escape, turns out to also be a much more traditionally capable and appropriate heir to the Venture throne.
¿Qué es eso?
Doc has spent his entire life being keelhauled through Jonas Sr.'s legacy without ever leaving his shadow. Now he's left pissing away his family fortune, unable to get over himself enough to properly operate as the super scientist he wants to be recognized as. And of course, raising two boys as a single father. While part of the joke is that the life of a boy adventurer would be traumatic, it's also that in Rusty we see the child actor.
When do we get to meet Rusty?
I'm Rusty Venture. Why can't you kids wrap your heads around that?
What happened?
I left Neverland so I could marry Wendy. What do you think happened? Any good questions?
Someone who was once admired for a public persona that didn't really reflect anything about who they really are, who never got the chance to come into their own, so they slid down into nothing. Can you imagine having the entire world treat you like you never met the standard you set when you were fucking 9 years old? Bone chilling. And he's not alone, he's got other broken contemporaries. Victims of the boy adventurer industry, I guess. Like Action Johnny, who may or may not be the actual Johnny, and whose thread in the series finds him slowly pulling out of being a psychotic junkie.
You can run, Johnny, but you will never get away!
Right? Yeah, we did that.
Yeah.
Or your Hardy Boys / Menendez brothers. It all just hangs together so nicely. The series' knack for meshing up pop culture and reality is exemplified here. There was a real Rusty Venture cartoon, but there was also a real Rusty Venture, and the real Rusty's life was a nightmare. So he has to cling to the only image of himself anyone has ever respected, even though it brought him nothing but stinking thinking and dilly-dallying. Rusty is living between the terrifying reality of his childhood and the impossible weight of his celebrity. Doc doesn't even know what really happened to him and what was made up to sell lunchboxes. Did he really ride a Pteranodon? I don't know, probably. You weren't there, fuck you.
My father made me kill a man with a house key. I was 10.
You get to empathize with Doc in spite of what a bastard wretch he is, in part because he's so goddamn impotent. When Jonas Venture manipulates and seduces women, it's completely scummy. When Doc tries to, you just kind of feel bad for him. It's never gonna work, and deep down he knows that.
I'm a man. I need to be touched. I don't want to be laughed at, denied, or even feel like the pathetic man I clearly am.
Does make some solid points, Brock.
I think that's a great example of how failure can improve your view of someone. You get the sense he doesn't even really know why he's doing it. He doesn't know why he's doing anything. But you can also empathize with Rusty because whenever you get the slightest peek behind the curtain, he does genuinely want to be the paragon of progress and super science you'd expect from the Venture name. He's often shown to be right on the edge of villainy himself. The Venture Brothers, like so many richer takes on superhero stories, really likes to play with the concept of identity. It's the idea that good and evil, heroes and villains are just roles we play.
He vows revenge, and then you tell him that good always triumphs over evil.
Does it?
Of course not. Now get out there and get this crap over with. You're blocking traffic.
They aren't something fundamental or innate, they're constructed by the world around us. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say the S word.
He always said he'd have the last laugh.
He was always wrong.
Welcome to the end of the Steak Bentley We Live in a Society and Fiction Isn't Real jackass trilogy. After this, we're done with self-awareness. We're talking about the anime where the hamster listens to the guy jerk off on the phone. That's a real outsider, alright. In the show, the main villainous organization, the Guild of Calamitous Intent, is really nothing more than a bureaucracy of LARPers, sustaining their violent role-playing through organized crime.
These guys like their system. You take that away and you are looking at a bunch of pissed off nutbags with ray guns and giant, I don't know, a giant octopus.
Rich and powerful lunatics who built the world around a game they wanted to play. Even before that, they were people who wanted to make the world better. Colonel Lloyd Venture, Rusty's great-great-grandfather, was a part of the guild itself until it splintered off and became what it is. It all comes from the same place. The serpent was already in the Garden of Eden. How perfect can that place be if it can't even keep out a snake who wants to trick you? There's really nothing of substance keeping Rusty on the good guy side. The good guys, the Office of Secret Intelligence, are again a mix and match. They're every SHIELD-type secret agent org and also just the US military, the CIA, and the FBI. Another example of people who never grew up. Only these people are running things, playing out their childhood power fantasies. They're barely less insane and bloodthirsty than the bad guys, so what's even the point of being a good guy in the first place? That's the world Rusty is caught between, and you can see how that could force him in some weird directions with this whole super science thing. Whatever moral compass he may have, it's being scrambled and dissolved by an acid magnet. He has a traumatic past and no respect for human life.
Not until we ship.
He's swimming in money he didn't earn and still feels owed something he doesn't have. He's scientifically literate, but not enough to actually help people. His scientific ventures are never curing disease or feeding people, they're all mad scientist bullshit. Clones and walking eyes and mutated lab techs, because that's what he grew up around. That's what's cool. In the pilot of the series, he's bringing a disintegration ray to a science conference and saying, "What? It's not a weapon, it's just like a city melting death ray. What's the fucking problem here?" For everything telling him he's supposed to be a hero, there's just as much that screams villain, because they come from the same place. They're the same person. There's an episode where Killinger, Henry Kissinger, as this all-knowing Mary Poppins-style supervillain life coach, essentially rolls into Rusty's life, forces him to confront his past, and then presents him with the option to really be a villain. And it's kind of powerful. Doc has the whole thing laid out for him, clear as day. This role is here for you, waiting for you to claim it. You have your nemesis, you have your means, you have the ability and the pain, you can do this and you'd be good at it. And Rusty can look at all of that, everything he's been through, and say, yeah, but I don't want to be evil.
He thinks I'm a... Brock, am I a bad person?
The hell just happened?
Am I, Brock?
That's the great thing about him. Sometimes being disillusioned just means you can see through the whole thing. Sure, the whole Super Science villain game feels stupid. It's not going anywhere, no one's accomplishing anything, it's all violence and roleplay. But at the end of the day, it's still real, and it still means something to us. Choosing to be a villain means choosing to be a bad guy. It means relinquishing the premise that you could ever do better, ever actually help anyone. And that's not who Rusty is. He's a scumbag, but he's a grown-up. Even in a show with brilliant characters, old pros and actual supermen, Rusty is the adult. And adults don't put on rubber masks and terrorize people just because it's fun, because that would be fucking silly. Jonas Sr. realized all this too, but to him it was a joke. To him it meant being above everyone. Rusty can't be above everyone, so he has to meet them at eye level.
I suddenly get it. You're children. That's why my dad put you in the pool and made you duke it out. Newsflash. My dad was a shitty parent.
Part of the bitterness of growing up is realizing that we're all just children who got old. No one really knows what they're doing, and when you come to terms with that, you can either look down on people, or you can show them the respect everyone deserves. How you treat children says a lot about how you treat people, which in turn says a lot about you.
He says that he's got a PhD in child psychology, so, you know, whatever.
Jonas Sr. will sit on the sidelines of a soccer game and laugh when the kids start crying and biting each other. Rusty will go out there and say, "Stop fucking screaming! You're the ones who wanted to play soccer, you have to follow the rules!"
This is how you deal with the problem.
Those boys are not your problem, Samson. They're my problem.
You're both wrong. Those boys are my problem.
That's why he's the better father, and it's why he's the better person. He's still bad, but at least he's grounded. At least he's honest and willing to involve himself in the game, even if it doesn't amount to much. The world may be nothing but a broken system, but it's still the world, and you're still a part of it. You can't just opt out, take the good and leave the bad. A fact that turned out to be JJ's fatal undoing. He wasn't willing to play the game. He stepped out of Rusty and into the Venture shoes, but then he tried to be Steve Jobs. He thought that's what being a Venture meant because he didn't go through what Rusty did, death rays and villains and what have you.
Well, it's an antiquated system. Maybe my brother is good with this namby-pamby guy in a costume chases you around nonsense, but I'm not.
He only saw the good in Jonas Venture Sr., which was wholly superficial, and he wanted to actually be what everyone thought Jonas Sr. was. It's a tragedy because JJ was a genuinely decent person. He believed in the potential of science Rusty does, but he actually seized upon it and made a name for himself, exemplifying how much Rusty squandered what he had without consideration for why he was a squanderer. The show had to be about brothers. It couldn't have just been the Dean Venture show. It's all about two people who come from the same place, made of the same stuff, finding their own identity. Jonas Jr. comes off as almost even more of a smug prick than Jonas Sr., but that's only because he's the real deal. He's just better than you, and that's fucking annoying, but more importantly, it's not something the world of this show is going to reward for too long. This series loves its characters, and it can get a little distracted exploring all of the great ideas you can do with them, and that's amazing. But it's also amazing that it's willing to accept when a character has played their role, and when they become a more valuable player dead than alive. It keeps things real and fresh. The most notable exception of this is probably Baron Underbite. It seems like a great idea, giving Doc his own Dr. Doom, but his joke just never came through.
That's it. I will tolerate no more of this madness.
He never found his place, and he just sort of got grandfathered out of the story on Gargantua alongside a bunch more interesting characters like Professor Impossible. Alongside the characters on the other side of the coin from JJ, like the Sovereign and the Investors. Villains who aimed a little too high and wanted to take the bad without the good. There's a weird sort of karmic balance to all the bullshit.
It is you who have forgotten your place. We were never meant to rule over these mortals.
They are but fools.
This is true.
Kept in line by characters like Killinger, the Master, and all the more competent higher-ups and keepers of the bureaucracy, like late-game Dr. Mrs. the Monarch. Even if the show is rooted in failure, somebody has to be keeping the lights on, which raises the question of how do you handle people who know what they're doing in a show like this? More often than not, the answer is simple. You undercut them. You make them a number 2 or a henchman and explain why they're there in the first place. Brock Sampson, our bodyguard, is a good example of this. The man is a living legend, a Superman, a nut dispenser. So there's something not quite right about the fact that he's sitting here taking shit from Rusty Venture of all people.
It's way too tight. You look ridiculous.
Yeah, you look great.
Insults. That's what you called me away from my spring cleaning for?
There's reasons. This is his punishment. He's protecting the magical hoo-ha, but really this is just sort of his role. Brock is a tool of the agency. Just because he's doing cool stuff and looking good doing it doesn't mean he's not taking orders.
Carry on, good and evil Superman.
You work for the government.
What about humanity and empathy and all that garbage?
Who cares? And you're a tool, boy. A tool! Built for a single purpose by the United States of shut your third damn eye for a f***ing reason. You can't teach a hammer to love nails, son. That dog don't hunt!
Brock was practically raised and whipped into tip-top shape by fucking Hunter S. Thompson, or rather Colonel Hunter-Gathers of the OSI. He's used to getting reamed by these skinny little pricks. With the Ventures, that still means indiscriminately killing whoever he has to. That's his job, after all. But it also means being the nanny. Brock gets